Just before 4:30 this afternoon, the state of Florida executed convicted killer Oba Chandler. Volunteer executioners administered a lethal injection, ending his life for killing a mother and her 2 daughters.
A death row inmate convicted of triple murder has been executed by lethal injection. News Channel 5's Michael Williams is standing by at the live desk following the late-breaking details. Michael.
Jay, that execution happened roughly a half hour ago. That Florida man convicted of killing an Ohio woman and her 2 teenage daughters while they were vacationing. Again, as Jay said, executed now by lethal injection. 65-year-old Oba Chandler had been convicted in 1994. Spent the last 17 years on death row.
We begin tonight with a convicted killer who just met his date with death. After a 17-year run on death row and a number of appeals, Oba Chandler died nearly half an hour ago by lethal injection at the Florida State Prison in Star.
Gilchrist County 911, what's the address of the emergency?
Yes, ma'am. I just shot my daughter and shot all my grandkids, and I'll be sitting on my step, and when you get here, I'm going to shoot myself.
You will find a homicide at Suite 43 South Pershing, Nancy Fox.
You admit to being evil, Richard?
We are all evil in some form or another, are we not?
All crimes have a motive. Go beyond the blood and discover the reasoning behind the darkest crimes in history.
May 26, 1989. Joan Rogers, age 36, and her daughters Michelle, age 17, and Christy, age 14, left their family farm in Wilshire, Ohio, for what was supposed to be a relaxing vacation in the Florida sun. This would be the first time the trio would leave their home state of Ohio. Law enforcement believed the trio became lost sometime around June 1st when they departed Orlando on their return trip to Wilshire. That's when, according to many, they decided to take an extra vacation day and head to Tampa, located along Florida's Gulf Coast. While looking for their hotel in Tampa, they encountered Oba Chandler. Oba Chandler was the 4th of 5 children, the son of Oba Chandler Sr. and Margaret Johnson. Chandler was raised in Cincinnati, Ohio. When Chandler was 10 years of age in June of 1957, his father hanged himself in the basement of the family's apartment. Chandler reportedly jumped into the open grave of his father as gravediggers prepared to cover the coffin. Chandler would father 8 children himself, with 7 different women, his youngest child being born in 1989. At the age of 14, Chandler began to steal cars and was arrested some 20 times as a juvenile. As an adult, Chandler's criminal behavior continued. He was charged with several crimes ranging from possession of counterfeit currency, loitering and prowling, burglary, kidnapping, and armed robbery. He was also suspected of masturbating while peering into a young woman's window. In one of his more serious crimes, Chandler was an accomplice that committed a home invasion, held the occupants at gunpoint, and robbed them. Chandler reportedly told his accomplice to tie up the man with speaker wire and took the woman into another room. There, he made her strip to her underwear, tied her up, and moved the barrel of his firearm across her abdomen. On June 4th, 1989, a body was found when several people on board a sailboat crossing under the Sunshine Skyway Bridge observed an object floating in the Tampa Bay. A second body was found floating off the pier in St. Petersburg, which is approximately 2 miles from where the first body was found. The Coast Guard was in the process of recovering the second body when a call came in about a third body, which was located 200 yards to the east. All 3 bodies were female, found floating face down, bound with a rope around their necks, and naked from the waist down. Autopsies would eventually be conducted on the 3 remains. The results of the autopsy showed that all 3 women had water in their lungs, a clear indicator that the women had been thrown into the water while still alive. Given the fact the women were naked from the waist down, detectives suspected the underlying motive for the crime was sexual in nature. Furthermore, all the women had ropes tied around their necks, with a concrete block tied to the other end of the rope. This would ensure the women would die either from suffocation or drowning, and that the murderer hoped the victims would never resurface. However, the bodies would eventually float to the top as a result of decomposition. It took investigators a week to positively identify the women after the discovery of their remains, by which time the women had been reported missing by their husband and father, Hal Rogers, in Ohio. On June 8th, a housekeeper at Days Inn reported the women's room to authorities. The room, according to the housekeeper, had not been disturbed, nor had the beds been slept in. The hotel manager would contact the police to report the suspicious room. Authorities fingerprinted the room, which were matched to the remains. Inside the room, authorities identified numerous personal articles, including clothing, suitcases, and papers belonging to the occupants. The investigators would finally put together the last piece of the puzzle using dental records. Sadly, the women would be positively identified as Joan Rogers and her 2 daughters, Michelle and Christy. Now the hunt for the suspect would begin. Researchers at the University of South Florida estimated that based on the currents and patterns of the water, the women were thrown into the water from a boat and not from a bridge or pier. They also stated the bodies had been in the water between 2 and 5 days before the discovery. At the Courtney Campbell Causeway boat docks, authorities located the car used by the women, a 1984 Oldsmobile with Ohio tags. The tires had sand wedged around them, indicating the vehicle had been at the location for some time. The case would go unsolved for 3 years, despite the many tips the police received from the public. Some have credited the number of tips as having dragged out the investigation. Perhaps one of the biggest tips came from a Madeira Beach police bulletin describing a similar rape of a young Canadian tourist approximately 2 weeks before the murders. Inside the Rogers vehicle, police recovered handwriting on a brochure directing the Rogers to a hotel. Investigators surmised this was the handwriting of the suspect, directing the Rogers women when they had become lost. Additionally, authorities discovered a description of a blue and white boat written by Joan Rogers. Police posted images of the handwriting on billboards throughout the Tampa area, pleading for tips. One individual in the Tampa area did recognize the handwriting as that of her former neighbor, Oba Chandler. The neighbor provided a work order to authorities that Chandler had written. Oba Chandler was subsequently arrested on September 24, 1992, for the triple murder. This would be the first time a billboard was used by law enforcement in such a manner, setting a precedent for billboards to be used as a common tool for law enforcement. Through handwriting analysis, the sample recovered from the Rogers vehicle and Chandler's work order would be matched conclusively. Chandler's palm print was also matched to a palm print recovered from the brochure with his handwriting. Another neighbor of Chandler and one of the secretaries on the investigative task force thought that Chandler resembled the composite sketch of the suspect in a seemingly related rape case. Adding to even more suspicion was the fact that Chandler sold his blue and white boat and left town with his family when the first billboards began to roll out. In 1990, when the television show Unsolved Mysteries was about to report on the deaths of the Rogers family, Chandler and his then wife moved from their home on Dalton Avenue in Tampa to Port Orange near Daytona Beach. In 1990, Unsolved Mysteries aired an episode featuring a theory that 2 individuals were involved in the Rogers murder based on an original police thought. This theory would be thrown to the wayside once Chandler was taken into custody. No evidence could be produced that linked a second individual to the crime. A former prison inmate of Chandler claimed that Chandler informed him of a second individual being involved. The cellmate claimed to know the identity of the second individual, but would not inform the police of such. Hal Rogers' brother, John, was also considered a suspect, even though he was in state prison serving a sentence for the rape of a woman who had shared his trailer at the time of the murders. Police investigating the woman's rape allegation found evidence indicating that he had also sexually assaulted Hal's daughter Michelle, although charges involving this assault were later dropped because of her reluctancy to testify. The St. Petersburg Times said that John may have planned the murder as he had visited his parents' property near Tampa a month before the murders. However, as the police established John could not have hired a professional killer, did not have an accomplice, and could not have known the timing of his sister-in-law and niece's trip, he was dismissed as a suspect. Hal Rogers was also considered a suspect because he had posted bail for his brother, knowing he had abused Michelle. He later said that he had promised the family he would post bail and would not renege on the promise. Investigators from Florida and Ohio discovered that Hal Rogers had withdrawn $7,000 from his bank at the time of the disappearance, which he was able to account for. He had planned on using it to look for his wife and daughters before he was notified of their debts. Investigations proved conclusively that he had never left Ohio during that period. The rape of Michelle Rogers and gossip by local people was one of the reasons for the Florida trip, so she and her sisters and mother could distance themselves from the incident. At his trial in Clearwater, Florida, Chandler said that he met the Rogers women and gave them directions, but he never saw them again except in newspaper coverage and on billboards. He never told authorities that he had seen the women again. He acknowledged that he was on Tampa Bay that night. The police had evidence of 3 ship-to-shore telephone calls made from his boat to his home during the time frame of the murders, but Chandler maintained that he was fishing alone. He claimed that he returned home late because his engine would not start, which he attributed to a gas line leak. He said that he called the Coast Guard and the Florida Marine Patrol and flagged on a patrol boat, but both were too busy to help. He said that he subsequently fixed the line with duct tape and returned safely ashore. However, there were no records of a distress call from Chandler to either the Coast Guard or the Marine Patrol that night, nor were there any Coast Guard boats on the bay the following morning that could have helped him. According to a boat mechanic who testified for the prosecution, Chandler's explanation of repairing the boat's alleged gas leak was not acceptable because the fuel lines in his boat, a bay liner, were directed upwards, A leak would have sprayed fuel into the air rather than into the boat, and the corrosive gasoline would have eaten away the adhesive properties of the duct tape Chandler maintained he had used to repair the reported leak. Chandler testified that he left his fingerprints and handwriting on the pamphlet that the Rogers women had. He recalled the driver was Michelle, as she had been standing on the driver's side of the car. Chandler remembered reading in the newspaper about 3 bodies floating up in the Tampa Bay. 4 days later, he recalled seeing the 2 girls' pictures, along with the mothers, in the paper. He did not realize that they were 2 of the same women he had met on June 1st. He thought the pictures looked entirely different from the people he met. Chandler said that he kept a knife on the boat, but he said he did not keep any other weapons on the boat. He said the knife was not a weapon, that it was used for fishing, cutting line, cutting rope. He kept anchor line on the boat. He had 2 100-foot anchors on the boat. Rollins Cooper worked as a subcontractor for Oba Chandler in the spring of 1989 for 3 to 6 months. He testified that on June 1st, 1989, between 11 and 12 a.m., Chandler brought him some screen. Cooper asked Chandler why he was in such a big hurry, and Chandler told him he had a date with 3 women. Cooper met Chandler the next morning at 7:05 a.m. Cooper thought Chandler was kind of grubby. When Cooper asked him why he looked like that, he said that he had been out on his boat all night. A cellmate of Chandler's, Edwin Ojeda, testified that he overheard Chandler tell another prisoner, Daniel Maxwell, that his biggest mistake was leaving the note in the car. Arthur Wayne Stevenson shared a cell with Chandler for 10 days in late October of 1992. He testified at trial that after viewing television reports about the recovery of the victims' bodies from Tampa Bay, Chandler said that he had met the 3 women and gave them directions to the boat ramp on the Courtney Campbell Causeway. Chandler told Stevenson that one of the girls was very attractive. Blake Leslie, an inmate at the Pinellas County Jail with Chandler in the fall of 1992, testified that Chandler told him that he took a young lady from another country for a ride on his boat. Her friend did not want to go. Once he got out 20 to 30 miles, Chandler told her to have sex with him or swim for it. Chandler allegedly said that the only reason that woman was still around is because somebody was waiting for her at the boat dock. Leslie, who had been convicted of 9 felonies, never heard Chandler speak of murders, only rapes. Also, Chandler's own daughter, Crystal May Sue, testified against her father, saying that he talked about killing the 3 women and that he was afraid of going back to Tampa. A maid who worked at the motel where the Rogers women stayed testified that she walked past Oba Chandler as she was going to the Rogers room for a room service on June 1st, implying that it seemed as if Chandler had just left the women's hotel room at around 12:30 that afternoon. The maid said she didn't realize the importance of the sighting until Chandler's arrest in 1992, although the sighting has never been confirmed. After the jury trial concluded, Chandler was found guilty of all 3 counts of murder on September 29, 1994. The jury reconvened for the penalty phase the next day. During the penalty phase, Chandler waived the presentation of any testimonial mitigating evidence. However, he did present some documentary evidence, including records showing that he obtained his high school equivalency diploma and earned college credits while in prison. The state presented the judgment and sentences of Chandler's prior armed robberies. The robbery victims also testified about the details of those crimes. The jury recommended a death sentence for each of the murders by a vote of 12-0 later that same day. On November 4, 1994, after adjudicating Chandler guilty on all counts, the trial court imposed 3 death sentences on Chandler for the murder of the Rogers family. After sentencing, the jury forewoman commented regarding the death sentence that, quote, "They needed to do this swiftly. The man is a mutation of a human being, and he needs to be destroyed." End quote. Chandler remained on Florida's death row, maintaining his innocence and continuing to pursue legal appeals. He continued to claim that he never met the Rogers women after that morning when he gave them directions. Chandler served his sentence at Union Correctional Institution. Shortly after the trial and conviction, his wife, Deborah Chandler, filed for divorce, and the marriage was formally dissolved a year later. Chandler was no longer allowed to see his daughter Whitney, and in accordance with his ex-wife's wishes, he was not allowed to see current photos of Whitney. In July 2008, it was revealed that Chandler was on Florida's short list of executions. Profiling experts believe that Chandler may have killed previously, based on the speculation that a first-time killer would not be experienced or bold enough to abduct and kill 3 women at once. Chandler remains a suspect in a 1982 murder of a woman found floating off Anna Maria Island. However, Chandler was never charged with other murders. Chandler received an institutional adjustment disciplinary report on December 15, 2001 for disobeying orders in prison. All of Chandler's appeals since his 1994 conviction were denied, the last one in May 2007. After his conviction, Chandler was named by media as one of Florida's most notorious criminals. Chandler said that his last words before his execution would be, quote, "Kiss my rosy red ass," end quote. In May 2011, comparison was drawn between the murder case and upcoming trial of Casey Anthony and Chandler's case and trial in 1994. As in both cases, the heightened media attention forced the jurors to be selected from outside the county of the committed crime. One of the jurors in Chandler's 1994 trial, identified as Roseanne Welton, also commented in an interview that, quote, "The people that he murdered did not have a choice of when they were going to die. Chandler should have had the same death penalty by now. He scared some of the jurors when he would sit there and stare at you and have that stupid grin on his face. He would make your skin crawl," end quote. On October 10th, 2011, Florida Governor Rick Scott signed a death warrant for Chandler. His execution was set for November 15th, 2011 at 4 p.m. The death warrant was signed the day before Chandler's 65th birthday. Chandler's lawyer, Bea Harrison, said that Chandler asked him not to file any frivolous appeals to keep him alive. Quote, "He's not putting a lot of pressure on me to go running around at the end to find some magic way out," Harrison said. "He's not going to make a scene. He's not going to bemoan the legal system. What he has told me is this: if there is some legal way that I can find to try to prevent him from being executed, he would like me to do that," end quote. Harrison also said that Chandler suffered from high blood pressure, coronary artery disease, and had some problems with his kidney and with arthritis. On October 12, 2011, Harrison said that although he was preparing to file a motion regarding the violation of his client's 5th and 14th Amendment rights in the case, he was unsure that Chandler was willing to make the trip to Clearwater for the court hearing or would even agree to the filing of the motion. On October 18, 2011, Harrison filed a motion against the execution on the grounds that the way Florida imposes the death penalty is unconstitutional. According to the filed motion, a jury makes a recommendation on life or death, but Florida law gives the judge the final say. Chandler did not attend the hearing in Clearwater, Florida. On October 24th, Chandler's appeal was rejected because he had already filed an appeal to the Florida Supreme Court prior to the decision. On November 15th, Chandler had chosen a last meal consisted of 2 salami sandwiches on white bread, 1 peanut butter sandwich on white bread, and iced tea. The execution process started at 4:08 p.m., and at approximately 4:25 p.m., Chandler was pronounced dead after receiving a lethal injection at the Florida State Prison in Rayford, Florida. Chandler had left behind a final statement, quote, "You're killing an innocent man today," end quote. Hal Rogers, the husband and father of the victims, attended the execution. Former St. Petersburg homicide detective Sindra Leedy, who investigated the case, said in a press conference, quote, "I'm glad there's finally an end to this. He doesn't deserve to live. He needs to die," end quote. After an autopsy, Chandler's body was claimed by his son, Jeff Chandler, who lives in Pasco County, according to the Department of Corrections. Prison officials also gave Jeff Chandler family photographs that Oba Chandler had in his cell on death row. Chandler never had a single visitor other than his attorney in all his years on death row. The only person to witness the execution on his behalf was Bea Harrison, the lawyer who fought for his life in various death appeals over the years. On February 25, 2014, investigators revealed that DNA evidence identified Chandler as the murderer of Ivelsa Bergesi, who was raped and strangled to death in Coral Springs on November 27, 1990. The 20-year-old newlywed was last seen at the Sawgrass Mills Mall, where she worked at a sporting goods store. When she did not return home, her husband went to the mall and found her car, a 1985 Ford Tempo with a tire slash. It is believed that Chandler, after scoping out the victim over a couple of days, slashed the tires and showed up in the guise of a good Samaritan and offered to help. 3 hours after she was reported missing, her body was found under a residential mailbox in a local neighborhood by 2 men returning from a fishing trip. When found, the victim was nude, had ligature marks on both wrists and leg, and brown duct tape stuck to her hair. The case is considered solved and closed according to police. Law enforcement agencies across Florida are looking into other unsolved homicides and other crimes in areas Chandler was known to have resided. The Discovery Channel devoted a 1-hour episode of its series, Scene of the Crime, titled The Tin Man, to the murder of the Rogers family. In 1997, a series of articles titled Angels and Demons, written by Thomas French, which told the stories of the murders, the capture and conviction of Chandler, and the impact of the crimes on the Rogers family and community in Ohio, was published in the newspapers St. Petersburg Times. It's clear that Chandler was motivated by sexual acts in his crimes. He shares his desires that turned murderous with those such as Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and others. He lured the Rogers onto his boat with a promise of a sunset boat ride, only to seclude them. Chandler received the death penalty for his crimes. His family, nor any of his friends, visited him while he spent his days on death row. This speaks to the volume of his crimes. To throw the Rogers into the water while still alive, one by one, is truly horrible and beyond words. One big takeaway from this case is the use of the billboards to show Chandler's handwriting. This is exactly how Chandler was identified. A few show notes to close on. I apologize for not putting out a new episode in some time. With the holiday season, a trip to England, my work, and coming down with the flu, it's been a challenge. The biggest help you can give to this show is to review it on any platform you listen to. iTunes is the biggest help. Your reviews will help get new listeners, and that should be the single goal for any podcaster. Also, please don't forget to subscribe. It will keep you updated on when new episodes roll out. Want to stay up to date on Beyond the Blood? Follow us on Twitter at BeyondBloodPC. Also, I'm hoping to get my Facebook up and running. Search Beyond the Blood on Facebook and you'll be able to find our page. I'll be at CrimeCon 2017 in Indianapolis, June 9th through 11th in Indy. Thank you for listening to another episode of Beyond the Blood.